Hello, Pedro from Brazil. Welcome. And Neto is joining from Finland. Welcome. All right, I think that we are complete and we can start. So hello, everyone. And our speaker today is Mr. Kunal Shah. He's a Nexus Scrum Master and Director for QA at Oracle. And he has a really impressive professional record, which spans over 20 years and has the titles such as Director for Software Engineering and Product. So generally, if you have a question that you always wanted to ask, a question about organizational development, a question about scaling that you always wanted to ask and you didn't have a right person to ask this question, then you can be sure that at one point in his career, Kunal has experienced that particular situation that you are thinking about now, and he is definitely the right person to talk to. Welcome, Kunal, and please take it over from here.
All right, thank you, Alexander. Let me share my screen. Let's make sure it's visible. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Hope it has been a good week and a good day. So first off, Alexander, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here. And I promise I will do my best to make sure it's worth your time. So today, let's talk about scaling Scrum and how a lightweight framework like Nexus can help you get started. Does it sound good? Let's get started. All right, so in the next 30-40 minutes or so, we'll discuss the following. We'll start with what scaling is, where Nexus fits in, how Nexus, even though it's not popular, we'll spend a few minutes on what it is about. We'll look at why one should consider Nexus while evaluating scaling frameworks. By its very nature, scaling is complex and challenging, and we'll look at few challenges that you might face with Nexus and how to resolve them. And finally, we'll conclude with some key takeaways and Q&A. And I would like to keep this session a little bit interactive. Maybe after the first 15 minutes or so, we can kind of have more interaction. That might make it a little easier for all of us. I am going to share the slides, but I would like you to grab a pen and paper. And if you currently are using a scaling framework or plan to use one in future, it would be beneficial to take down some notes and jot down your thoughts as they come while we go through this. Okay, so a very quick introduction before we start. I hope I have your permission to introduce myself. I started my career a long time back, way back, even before Google and Amazon were born. And currently, as Alexander said, I work for Oracle as a director of software quality, and I am the Nexus Scrum Master for some products. Now, I have spent equal time in India and US, and I've worked with teams across the world for most part. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well as on Medium. I also serve as the editor at Serious Scrum. A shameless plug for Serious Scrum. It's an awesome peer-reviewed publication with over 7,000 members. If you're serious about Scrum or would like to contribute to the Scrum community, I strongly recommend you to join the community, and it is completely free. So we will use the chat box for any Q&A, and I would prefer if, I hope you please preface it with the Q at the beginning so that we know it's a question and we can answer that. Right? So, all right, let's start with why scale. Very simple, right? So let's take a couple of minutes to answer these questions on your notepad or in chat. Write down your thoughts and responses to these questions, right? What are your fundamental beliefs about scaling frameworks? Do you think they work? Do you think they don't work? Should you scale or descale, or descaling is the way to go? What business outcomes do you want from scaling? What are the biggest barriers to achieve these outcomes? What characteristics of scaling frameworks will enable these adoptions? So if we can take a couple of minutes, and if I can request you to share your thoughts in the chat window. I would really appreciate it. Anyone? All right, let's talk about your biggest barriers to achieving these outcomes from scaling. What are your challenges? Let's talk about that.
I see that there is a post in the chat.
So scale for multi-team, so coordination is a challenge. Okay. What else? Okay. All right. So coordination, communication, that seems to be the challenge. Okay, we'll start with that. All right. So to me, and I'm hoping actually, the reason to ask this question is I'm hoping that I can answer some of your questions today. And if not, we can always connect offline and I can try and help. So to me, these are the 5 key desired outcomes from any scaling activities. You got to increase value, and by that focus on delivering the valuable products and solutions that the customers use, improve quality so that the integrated products and solutions that we sell our customers, they work seamlessly end to end. Reduce time to market, which means delivering the valuable features and the solutions more frequently and more regularly. Descale and reduce the waste of time, effort, and energy. Reduce risk by making sure that you descale the uncertainties. You find out, you fail early, understand that this is what works, what doesn't, and that way you can reduce your risk. So if you notice, all of these essentially also answer the question, why Scrum? Right? So scaling is no different. Our goals and objectives remain the same. Just that now we have several teams working on the same product or one product. But our customers, they don't care whether we have one team or many teams, one product or multiple products, whether we use Scrum or we don't use Scrum, whether we scale or we descale. The ask from our customers is very simple. All they care about is give us the features that are valuable to them and that they work as expected. That's it. As simple as that. They really don't care how we go about doing that. Right? So where does Nexus fit in? So Nexus can help in a couple of areas. So you may have a product and that may have a bunch of teams. So when you're scaling your product development, Nexus is probably one of the easiest frameworks to start with. Nexus can also work in a situation where you have a platform and then there are multiple products associated with that, and then each of the product has a bunch of teams. So as an example, let's say Microsoft Word is a product, and I'm assuming that it's being built by more than one teams at any given time. Now, a platform could be the entire MS Office suite, and that would have a bunch of products, right? Word, Excel, Outlook, and so on. And each of those would have a bunch of different teams working with them. And then we have, so this is product scaling at the top. And then we have organizational scaling where not just the IT organization, but organizations look at scaling HR, finance, sales, etc. And then there is vertical scaling where you scale across the organizational org structure. So now Nexus fits in perfectly for product scaling. If you are looking at any of these two scenarios, then Nexus works very well. It does not work at organizational scaling level. Okay? So why Nexus? Simplicity is one of the first reasons that comes to mind. Nexus is very simple and lean, and it is conducive to very high level of productivity and optimization across all efforts. The learning curve is very little. If your teams use Scrum successfully today, they will hit the ground running with Nexus, no problem. And there is an obsessive focus on two areas in Nexus. One is integration, and second is managing and reducing dependencies. So Scrum does not mandate the backlog refinement event, but Nexus does. And one of the objectives of Nexus refinement is to identify dependencies between teams and find ways to manage them such that they do not impede development. Okay? Nexus proposes a very tangible set of tools and complementary practices that help in scaling software development. There are also very few additional roles now called accountabilities, and require almost no organizational changes to use it at all. So because there are no organizational changes, it's very easy to adopt. You don't have to go to HR or request any org changes. Nexus also allows teams to start small and grow. For example, you can start with 2 or 3 teams in Nexus. As the process streamlines, teams understand what is expected of them. They become more familiar with the complementary practices. Additional teams can be easily added to the overall Nexus. And in terms of learning, other than maybe a few people on the team, no additional training and certifications are required. And last but not the least, material is available online for self-paced learning. There is just one certification called Scaled Professional Scrum, and it would be good for a few people to understand what it is. Now, I will very quickly walk through what Nexus looks like. It's very similar to Scrum. We won't be able to get into a whole lot of details. So we have, like I said, a Nexus refinement.
No,
Yes.
there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Does no organizational change mean you keep component teams if there are any?
Good question, Benny. No, that's not what I meant. So the one assumption that I'm making here is that you are already using Scrum. And if you are using Scrum, then I'm assuming that you have moved away from the component teams. I hope that answers the question. If not, Benny, we can have further conversation, maybe towards the later part of the, maybe in 30 minutes or so. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we have the refinement event that I was just referring to, and then we have the product backlog. The idea here is that the different teams, the different Scrum teams get together and identify what dependencies they have based on the sprint, the Scrum backlog they have picked up for that particular sprint. And then there is the Nexus planning, where again it is specifically focused on planning for that sprint. In the product backlog, we have in the refinement activities more little longer duration. It's like a couple of looking out maybe 2 sprints out. Nexus sprint planning is for that one specific sprint. And then we have a sprint backlog, Nexus sprint backlog, which essentially tracks the dependencies between the different teams during that sprint. And then we have 3 to 9 teams working on the same product backlog. We have Nexus daily Scrum meetings, just like the daily Scrum meetings, which is attended by representatives of different teams. And then we have Nexus sprint review, which basically replaces the individual Scrum team reviews. And then we, at the end, we come out with the integrated increment. And when the sprint ends, we have the sprint retrospective, which is similar to the Scrum retrospective, except that it is the focus is on addressing key issues that are common across teams, integration issues that are common across teams and such. And then there is a new role called Nexus integration team, which is basically responsible not for integrating, but for making sure that the end of a sprint, there is an integrated increment available. And that means they basically facilitate to solve any integration related problems. They necessarily themselves may not be doing it. I know this is a very quick overview, but given the time, we can kind of, we'll have to make do with this. And if anybody is interested, we can definitely go in further detail at a later time. Let's quickly talk about the dependencies mapping. So let's say here we have 3 teams working on a product, and we have current sprint after that, and the sprint, one more sprint after that. So team A is supposed to work on, say, story 1, 4, and 7 in these across these 3 sprints. Team B 2, 5, 8, and then team C 3, 6, and 9. Right now, this is how you would. This is one way of mapping the dependencies. What this means is team A is going to work on story 4 in sprint 1, and then they are going to work on story 7 in sprint 2, but that story 7 depends on 4. So 4 needs to be done in this sprint. Otherwise, story 7 would be at risk. Same thing with story 8, that team B plans to work on sprint +2. It depends on story number 4. And so this kind of indicates that this is there is a dependency between these two. Same thing for team, in the current sprint, team B is working on story 2. Story 6, which team C is going to work on in the next sprint, is depending on that. And this is kind of the scary situation where in the same sprint, you have one team depending on the other. So team C in this case depends on team B to finish story 5. And then there are different ways of, the color coding is, whether it's a people dependency or a technology dependency and such. So this is one way of mapping the dependencies a little bit out, current sprint plus subsequent few sprints, so that the teams can plan their work accordingly. Now let's look at how a sprint would look like in a given sprint would look like. So here team A is working on story 4, but story 1 that team B has to work on is being blocked by this story. So until story 4 is done, team B cannot. So team B has the story 4. Story 1. They cannot start story 1 because it is blocked by story 4 here. So this is a view of a specific sprint. So I hope you see the difference. This one here is futuristic, and this one is the current sprint. Okay? And then, like I said, Nexus talks about a whole bunch of complementary practices. Obviously, we won't be able to go through all of them, but they are basically broken up into 4 different areas. How do you organize teams? How do you organize work? How do you run the Nexus? And how do you manage Nexus? We will quickly take a look at one of the practices that is suggested. So now Nexus doesn't say that you have to adopt all of these practices. You look at what makes sense in your situation and pick and choose what makes sense for you. Okay? So let's look at forming a Nexus. How do you organize your work? So that the technique is impact mapping. What does it do? It looks at the goal that we have and then figures out a way to convert this goal into PBIs that the teams can pick up. So how does it happen? So you look at the goal. Based on the goal, you look at the personas that are impacted by the goal. So in this case, the goal is increase the number of customers by 20%. So it's a taxi company, and this is the goal. Now, who are the customers? There are some existing customers, taxi customers, female customers, tech-savvy riders, and so on. Now, what is the outcome we expect of these personas to have? To have a great ride, have an easier riding experience, and so on. What is the business impact of that? And how do we make it happen? So, for example, if you say a taxi customer should have an easier riding experience, then these are the PBIs that would help make it happen. For example, book trips in advance, communicate with driver in real time, and so on. So now when the teams work on these PBIs, they're able to tie back the PBIs to the overall corporate goal that is being set. So this is just one example.
There is a question related to the overall goal. Would you define the goal of the impact map during the refinement together with the teams?
It would be done even prior to the refinement in general. It is kind of like a product goal, if you will, or maybe a couple of goals that you have set for a release or maybe 2 releases and such. It would depend on your environment, but it would be a little bit higher in that sense. But it could be up to you. It's completely what would make sense in your organization.
And another question, thank you. And another question, Nito is asking, I work with SAFe currently. It has an inspect and adapt sprint where PI planning happens, where dependencies for future sprints are mapped. Does Nexus have the same, where there is an additional sprint for planning and identifying future sprints and dependencies?
So SAFe in that way is, I in my opinion, okay, again, just what I feel about it, is highly structured and there's a lot of prescription there. Whereas in Nexus, it is really adaptive and it's more closer to Scrum than Safe is. So there is no specific sprint just for mapping the dependencies. It is done on a continuous basis. It's done on a daily basis in the Nexus daily Scrum. It is done in all of these reviews and retros and refinement meetings. So the dependencies are being tracked and mapped and managed on a very regular basis. Hope that answers the question. The length is up to you, just like Scrum. It could be 1 week, 2 weeks. It all depends. My experience is 2 weeks probably works the best. It's not too short, not too long. But there is no fixed length like in I believe in Safe there is a 2-week kind of mandated or fixed sprint length. That is not the case in Nexus. Okay. All right. Let's look at a few quick challenges that you might face. So give me a second. Okay. So with any large and complex projects, they all come with their own sets of challenges, right? So when you're working with a whole lot of people across the globe, time zone is a huge challenge, right? So those challenges are going to be present whether you use Nexus or Safe or any other framework for that matter, right? And then when you want to get a large number of people together, no time zone is going to work for everyone. The workday will get extended for at least some people involved. But a couple of things may help. One is forming teams that are based on geographic location or time zone. So that way, at least the Scrum teams can get together during the day and collaborate a lot better amongst themselves. Maybe have few representatives participate at Nexus level and not everybody. Maybe record the meetings for team members who can't dial in. Maybe have follow-up Q&A. Have demos recorded before the meetings, if possible, so that people can view it, be prepared for the Nexus meetings when they come and reduce the meeting times. Because in general, when meetings are large, and Nexus meetings tend to be large, developers of all Scrum meetings, they really can't attend, right? So teams should keep a couple of factors in mind. First and foremost, stay focused on the agenda. Encourage participants to come very well prepared for the meetings and focus on the quality and the content of these meetings. Because each hour wasted, just multiply that potentially by the loss of productivity of 60, 70, 80 man hours, depending on your team size, right? So this leads to the next challenge. That there are possibly multiple meetings at the same time. A combination of these challenges, right? Time zones, large meetings, overlapping meetings, mean that the entire teams cannot participate in all these meetings. Yet participation in Nexus is very critical. So teams would have to be very careful in deciding how to represent their team in different meetings. And this also creates opportunities for many more team members to represent their teams. This in turn helps improve collaboration and sense of ownership. It also teaches the team on how to optimize the limited time and the resources that they have. Now, we have seen how dependencies are mapped and tracked very briefly, right? Delays in the deliverables of one team has a cascading impact on the other teams. So transparency becomes extremely important so that teams can react to potential delays, maybe either by switching out tasks, reprioritization, what have you, right? All teams in Nexus must agree on a minimum definition of done. As teams mature, the definition of done also evolves and becomes more inclusive over time. The challenge is not all teams mature at the same time. Some teams may want to tighten the DoD, other teams may not be ready for changes just yet. So it does take time to get people and teams on the same page, right? When you have large product teams, there's a lot of collaboration that is required, right? There will be conflicting priorities that is put on different teams. So this is where product owners would have to work closely with each other and with senior management, product strategy, product marketing, etc., to ensure that the feature priority is aligned with the company direction. So priority conflicts must be tracked very carefully, right? Let's move on to the next topic. How do you make it successful, right? So first things first, right? Um, Nexus is very simple, right? It's very simple, but the first thing is the teams have to understand why we are using Scrum along with the what of the Scrum. So mechanics of Scrum is one thing, but understanding why we are using it is extremely important because Nexus is just an extension of Scrum. Be comfortable to adapt Nexus to fit your needs. It is okay to tweak the framework depending on your practical situations. So for example, if you have if you have a few things go, let's take a look at the Nexus sprint review. This is supposed to be done at the end of the sprint, and let's say today is the end of the sprint, and let's also say that we have some teams in India and some teams in the US. So the India day is wrapping up now. It's about 9 p.m. in the evening, but the US day is just about starting. So if we have the Nexus review today now, it would work for the teams in India because for them the sprint has ended. However, for the teams in the US, they still have a whole last day of the sprint ahead of them. They would have to still participate in the review one day ahead of the sprint end. In such cases, be comfortable to change the rules of the game to suit your practical situations. Right? Another example I can give you is, according to Nexus, individual Scrum team reviews are replaced by a common shared Nexus review. However, we find it very beneficial in some cases to have individual Scrum team reviews as well. In such cases, go ahead with that. Don't scrap it just because Nexus says so. Right? Nexus also provides ample opportunities to inspect, but don't limit it to just the Nexus events. Use additional tools and create opportunities to keep a pulse on the progress. For example, use one question, quick survey type of a questionnaire on a regular basis. These will not take more than maybe 5 minutes for your team to respond to, but it will give you a good pulse of an idea of where your team is at. Questions could be very simple as, what is the most important benefit your team has experienced from Nexus? Questions like these just pick the brains of your team. It gives you an opportunity to understand what is going on. They may not result in any action, but that's okay. You could ask questions like, what is the most important area where you need help? Such questions will identify areas of improvement for individual teams. And the biggest value of such question would be that the teams themselves have identified the areas where they need help, and they will be receptive for outside help. So keep a couple of things in mind when you do something like this. Don't make it too frequent. In that case, it will lose importance. And two, follow up with action. If you don't, teams will stop responding, thinking that there's no point in responding to these questions since it doesn't result in any actions.
Kunal, we have a question in the chat talking about the practical tools. Are there any advices to resolve or eliminate the dependencies instead of managing them?
The one way to, it is almost impossible to eliminate all dependencies, especially when you have multiple teams working on the same code line. So you would have dependencies in terms of product skills, technical skills, functional skills, and you might be using the same code line, same files of program that may have to be updated. So in cases like that, the only way, or I should say one way that works really well, is to slice up the stories, make them granular enough that you can work on them parallelly and continuously keep getting work done, rather than having them too big where the dependencies are many. But dependencies will be there. I have not come across a situation where you can completely resolve or eliminate the dependencies at all. And that is a key, right? When you have people, when you have multiple people, dependencies will exist. We just have to find the best ways to manage and deal with them. I hope that answers the question. All right. So, and the last thing I have on this slide is leverage the experience of your managers. When you work on large projects, invariably there will be politics to be dealt with. Managers on your teams have experience navigating through the company politics, negotiating win-win solutions, and help teams remove impediments. Your developers love to build great products. Let them focus on that and have your managers work through other challenges. Managers may also be experienced developers themselves, and they can pitch in to resolve technical bottlenecks. Managers can also focus on strategic objectives and can work on, say, proof of concept if needed. They can validate technology. They can help improve the definition of done. They can support the teams in many other ways. So sometimes you may need a referee even for self-managed teams, and managers can play an important role there as well. The takeaway is ensure that the managers understand their purpose and their role in Nexus. Without it, they will feel they have lost their control, power, and responsibility. And it will just cause them to resent Nexus. And that is absolutely the last thing you want to see. Right? And wrapping up with a few more pointers. So
another question in the chat following up.
yes.
If managers are consulted for resolving impediments, what would be the value of the Nexus Scrum Master? Will this not also lead to command and control?
Not necessarily, and I'll tell you why. Nexus Scrum Masters may or may not be able to resolve all the challenges. They are not. They basically facilitate solving problems. They themselves may or may not be able to solve them. Whereas managers may be able to resolve a lot of technical impediments, as an example. Because of their expertise, they may be able to maybe do a prototype, maybe do a pilot, do a proof of concept, maybe work with other managers, and they may be able to do a lot of things that the Nexus Scrum Master may not be able to do. Imagine you have like 60 plus people or 80 plus people working on a Nexus, and one Nexus Scrum Master may just not be enough. The Nexus Scrum Master ensures that the teams follow what Nexus tells us to do. It ensures that there is transparency. It ensures that we are getting to a point where an integrated increment will be available. I hope that kind of answers long-winded answer, but I hope that answers what you were looking for, Dr. Jake. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So just a few more pointers, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So Nexus is built, like we said, right? Nexus is built on Scrum, and inspection and transparency are, we just said, very important values. Now, just as management expects Scrum teams to be transparent, management should also be transparent in their decision making. This builds not only trust, but it also creates a common understanding of where things are at, what challenges are. And when people understand why management makes certain decisions, they tend to accept them more easily. Right? They may not agree with it, but they will accept it more easily. Right? Adapting Scrum and Nexus requires a major mind shift change. A 2-day training that generally companies tend to have to train people on Nexus on Scrum is just not going to cut it. It is critical to develop an in-house program for continuous training and education. It need not be classroom training. It could be brown bag sessions, experience sharing sessions, brainstorming sessions, bouncing off ideas of each other's. Just find ways to keep the team engaged on getting better at Scrum. The more they are emotionally involved, the more they will internalize Scrum and make it a permanent habit. And your executive management really may not care about how you scale, what framework you use. They just care about the result and your customers. They just want a couple of things. They want happy customers. They want more of them. How the teams accomplish it is generally up to the teams. And to that effect, they may or may not support large-scale organizational changes. And that's where, that's another reason that I mentioned. Nexus just doesn't require you to make organizational changes on a large scale. You can start small and give it a try. Now, strive for incremental maturity. That's another very important thing. And whether it's people, process, product, management, understanding, what have you, your objective should be to build one step at a time. And as long as you can do that, as long as you continue to mature, you will be successful in your development scaling efforts. Number 5 is last but not the least, learn to deal with missed goals. Yes, your teams will miss their sprint goals. And obviously, you don't want all your teams to miss their sprint goals all the time. Missing sprint goals in Nexus can have a very, very bad cascading effect on other teams. Hence, it is critical to make sure your goals are met. But every once in a while, things will not go as planned. And watch it like a hawk. And be understanding that at times, the teams and management will have to learn to deal with missed goals in a positive way. And how management responds to missed goals will actually tell you a lot about the maturity of the overall organization. And with that, we are at the end of the presentation. Thank you once again. Appreciate you all being here today. I hope this was useful, and I am very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Kunal, for the insightful presentation. And a question that I have is related to the retrospectives, Nexus retrospectives. You mentioned that during the retrospective, the teams are discussing overall collaboration, and I wonder what are the ways, how do you make sure that there is also space to discuss not only the topics which are external to the teams involved in the delivery process, but also the internal topics, internal to the teams?
Can you elaborate on the question a little bit?
Yes, I mean that if there are so many people involved in the retrospective, and there are of course a lot of topics related to the collaboration between teams that have to be discussed. At the same time, there are topics which are internal to the teams, so some topics related to the collaboration inside of the teams. How do you make sure? How do you balance out those insights, those views, internal and external?
Right. So the primary focus of Nexus Retro is to address intercompany issues or issues that impact multiple teams. Now, the issues that impact individual teams, we can generally take it up with the Scrum Master should be able to deal with them. And when they can't, then the Nexus Scrum Master or the Agile coaches, if there are any, they help with those type of issues that are specific within a specific team.
Thank you. And there is a question in the chat. What are the main differences compared to SAFe?
So there are actually many differences. I'm by no means, I have a lot of experience on SAFe, but what I can tell you is it fits in here as well. So if you are looking at organizational wide scaling, then SAFe is probably a better option to go than Nexus. Nexus only focuses on product scaling. Product development scaling is what it focuses on.
All right, thank you. And I received some questions in the chat asking whether we can already switch on our microphones and cameras and ask the questions directly. And for that, let me switch off the recording. There is one last question in the chat. Let's address it in the current Q&A session, and then I will switch off the recording and invite everybody for a conversation. So the question is, you mentioned descaling in the beginning of your presentation. So could you provide a case for descaling, like an example, practical example?
A practical example of descaling, good question. So basically, what do you mean by descaling? That's the first thing to answer, right? Descaling is not scaling. And one area where we can use descaling is to try and keep the work independent such a way that communication can be reduced or eliminated. And that would be one example of descaling communication. One of the biggest challenges of any scaling or any large project is the cost of communication. if you can isolate, separate work, reduce dependencies in such a way that you require less communication, more people, more teams can work independently. They can, if they can work and make decisions locally, then that would be, that's how you would descale. So if there are some product decisions that can be made, if some technology decisions that can be made by teams individually, then that would be one example of how you would descale the effort.
Thank you very much. And if I may just follow up on the question, there is a very handy framework which is called Team Topologies. I will also share the name in the chat, which provides a lot of insights on evolving the team, the ways how the team collaborate, and it's also applicable to the scaling. So thank you very much, Kunal, for your answers. Let me stop the recording now, and let's chat.